Uh,
Hi, David. Thank you so much for doing this interview. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, and where you're from?
yeah, yeah. So David Njau is my name. From I typically say I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, but I'm really not from Nairobi. I'm from the outskirts of it, uh, about 20 to 30 minutes at the one might call the best of both worlds, being able to access the city when that's a need, but also growing up in a homestead with cows and chicken and goats and everything that you would expect in a village.
Right.
Um, yeah, so my majority, I went to school in Kenya from kindergarten all the way through high school, and came to college in the United States. Studied for a total of about 4.5 years, but also in between was away from the college for a total of about 3 years. Um, it was an interesting college journey, uh, and now I work in the United States as the director of international student programs and services.
Good. So tell me
Yeah.
about that back and forth journey. What was that like?
Back and forth from through during the college
Yes.
time. Um, it was the first time I left the college was unfortunately it was because of a family tragedy, and I was gone for a semester, uh, and then I came back to finish, but after one semester of near total breakdown, I went back home. It's only in hindsight that I realized that it was near total mental breakdown. When I was going back home, I went believing, genuinely believing that I'm going there to do music research and continue into a business idea that I had after doing a talk radio show. But I think all of those things were, um, because I felt I needed to go home with a purpose.
Mhm.
It's only in hindsight that I realized that I needed to go home, period. I went home thinking that I'm going to be there for only a semester. But towards the end of that one semester away, I decided to prolong my stay there, because the business was just picking up, and I was still continuing with my research. And I kept prolonging little by little, and before I knew it, it had been 2 years um, at home, before coming back in 2016 to complete college. It was a fascinating experience, being in the U.S. for 2.5 years and then going back for back home. Um, the 4 months were because of the tragedy. It was the passing on of a dear and close family member, that occasioned my first trip. So it was a tough time. The first time that I went. The second time I went I was still in that healing process. Um, the but there were it was tough because obviously of what had happened, but it was also tough being home and realizing how long it had been since I had been there, and the readjustment that one has to undergo after being away, and somewhat feeling like a bit of a stranger in your own home. I think that I was very grateful for being away for about 2 years, because being at home for about 2 years, it's in hindsight that I realized that about the first 5 months of those 2 years were readjustment months.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Culturally
I was
readjusting.
culturally readjusting. Yes. Because when you're away, the lingo changes, the value of money changes. There's so much that you do, and you look like a tourist without knowing. I'm doing my best to be very normal and very relatable, and just the same David that left. But I think it took a good at least 4 to 6 months just becoming normal again, so to speak. um,
Did,
and I
did
was very
your
great.
did your
Yeah.
friends treat you like
Mhm.
differently?
I think there was a
Friends,
little bit of that. Yeah. Because again, there's this sense that you're from the US, right? And in fact, sometimes that there would be that reference. People
despite
from the
and how
US.
long did you spend in the US before that? Going back?
It had been 2.5 years only.
And still they
Um,
think you're from the US.
there was that reference to me being someone from the US, or as though I can represent the US and US thinking and US culture. And that was, I guess, to some people that would be flattering, but to me that was othering, alienating, because all of a sudden I wasn't, just another person. Um, and despite my truly genuine and ardent efforts to remain very just normal. I don't. I used public transport. I continued to do the same things that I used to do before leaving for the US. But that did not keep. It's not all friends, but in certain circles, I could tell that there is that reference to me as a US person. It was so. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that, right? Because part of it is glorifying and deifying the United States as the, as the source of all solutions and the beginning of all progress. And uh, I did also apply efforts in, you know, kind of rekindling our own, so to speak, collective self-esteem as Kenyans, as Africans, as people of color in general. That we have something of value. And yes, that the images that you see of the U.S. As a U.S. person, I can tell you, it is not. There's much more than meets the eye. Yeah.
That's very
So
interesting. But tell me
yeah,
about how Americans perceive you then.
yeah. It's fast. It varies very wildly. Um, yeah. My engagement with folks in the US has been primarily as a student and later as an employee. And also as a student, I was a student employee. So um,
But there's a
what
different
I
dimension to that you're not just an employee, but a director of a
but there's
department.
that too. Yes. Um, as a student, I think I used to notice um, that there was a little bit of an expectation that you don't know what's going on, right? And it would take several instances, whether that's participation or presentation, or a question that you asked, for people to think like, did that come from you? Right? Um, almost to suggest they had no expectation that you would have something of value to contribute, or that you could engage in that class in any manner that would be considered intelligent. So that's that was that was a common dynamic. I think throughout, it was a common theme throughout my time as a student, and most of it was, I think it was very innocent. It was, but I think there was, I don't know if it's what they refer to as implicit biases, right? Just looking at you, knowing where you're what's going on. There's also the accent. Speaks any language, speaks it with an accent. But there's I think that also was something that that perhaps informed that expectation that you would not have something of value to add. I think there was also an expectation. Yeah.
No, just to comment, I really thought that that was an age thing. But recently, I realized even no matter what your resume looks like and how many gray hairs you have on your head, it's still perceived that you're not quite knowledgeable about things. And then some might say it's the approach you take, despite the fact that it's quite similar to the approaches that you see. So it's really and the fact that you have been appreciated in other circles. But once you're a student, you're supposed to start from ground zero and you're not seeing everything else.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that you should say that about the perceptions. And do you think that's a culture from here, or do you think that's culture back home as well?
Oh, that's interesting. Let me come back to that in just a little bit. There was one more thing I wanted to add, which was one piece of expectation also was that if you're coming from from an African country or an Afro ethnic country in any way, that or a developing country, I think there was an expectation that you will take you will be subservient and self-hating, and and any reference you make to your country or to your culture will be either to it as something that is lower, or just something that is, just entertaining. Nothing substantial. So you can talk about your tribal dances or your, tribal music, and tribal food, because everything you do is tribal. But but there was no expectation of conversation around civilization or ideas or innovation, or cuisine, right? Because where you come from, there's food, but there can't be cuisine. you know, um, there's tribal art, but there can't be, fine arts, or culture in that sense. I think anytime I would, represent myself, so to speak, or where I come from, as a place and as a background that also has its dignity, I could tell that was not always, that has not always been received well or received as normal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally get what you're saying, because I have mentioned in some courses about like a Nobel Peace Prize laureates who were for sustainability, and from the islands,
Mm-hmm.
and we mentioned, that, we have persons who've written great works and directed great films, and,
Yeah.
but, it's somehow, disbelieved. It's met with a
Yeah.
certain sort of circumspect that, really, it's
Right.
kind of hard to understand. It's I
Yeah.
know for the school that I am in right now, the preschool, there's a
Yeah.
move to get as many diverse books as possible. It's a pity that we don't do
Mm,
diverse literatures in and
mm,
movies. I mean, international movies
mm-hmm.
are a big thing. So I don't
Right.
I wish we would do some of these sort of things as well.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I I'm saying all of this to lead to another question about some of the
Mm-hmm.
misconceptions, to go deeper
Mm-hmm.
into these misconceptions, because it was one
Right.
Canadian interviewee had said to me, and I remembered
Mm,
Africa straight off the bat, that,
mm,
Americans perceive that Canada is in Alaska and everywhere is cold. Everybody speaks
yeah.
French, and everybody.
Right.
So there are many cultural misconceptions about who we are, and the geography
Right.
is very uh
Yeah.
not what it is. Can you tell me a little bit
Right.
about that in Africa?
Yeah.
Seeing that
That's
you are
very
from
fascinating.
Africa, all of Africa.
All of it. Yes. uh, um, yeah. I mean, I've thought about that. And someone made a comment that uh, because of perhaps because of the size and the economy of the United States, um, um, it has been possible for too many uh, uh, Americans, U.S. Americans, um, to stay in the American bubble, right? Without necessarily having to engage and interact beyond these borders. So have American products, American entertainment, American music, American religion or religious practices, um, with almost to the exclusion of anything beyond the borders of these United States, um, unlike us, I suspect many other countries that are not as big and whose economies necessarily have to engage with other economies and polities. um, you don't have a choice but to engage with other peoples. um, in the case of, for instance, where you come from, it's like a melting pot, the true melting pot. I think that there's a tendency to call the United States the melting pot of cultures, but there are countries that are true melting pots of people from all over the world. Um, yeah, sorry, I think I digressed from the question. Um,
No, no, just, what are some of those other things besides
yeah.
geography? It's just that we come here
Mm-hmm.
so aware of America, but they're so
Right.
unaware of everything around them. With the Canadian who I interviewed was saying,
Yeah.
look how much we know about the entire world. I think
Right.
the
Right.
Canadians know, because maybe because they're part of the Commonwealth, I don't know. But
I'm yes.
but
Um,
they know.
yes. Yeah. So from almost everything
Did you know
from
as much about America when you what did you know a lot about America when you first came? Yeah.
I would say yes. I mean, so much so that even when referring to the education system, I would use words like grade grade five, grade seven, and so on, which we don't use in Kenya, but I knew how to translate that into the American system. Um, um, you know, something that if I were to tell an American standard 1, standard 2, form 1,
Yeah.
form 3, they would
Nice
not have
colonial
a
words.
clue.
Yeah.
Right. They would not, most would not have a clue what that is. Of course, then there's the perception. Well, geography is a big part, right? The expectation, for instance, that all of Africa is very hot all the time. You know, very hot and very dry all the time. And so when you would make references to missing, when I would make references to missing home and missing the weather, they'll be like, "Oh, really?" You know, because they're thinking you're coming from a place that's always scorching. You know, how is it possible that you would miss the weather in Africa? You know, um, there's also I guess jokes and comedy, right? By the time you're getting here, you probably have watched some American shows, but also you've watched some even British and Australian shows. So in terms of your repertoire of what is funny, it's a bit wider by the time you get here. Um, uh, but yeah, so there's yeah, I think there was the politics too, right? So by the time you're getting here, you're well aware of major events in the United States, um, political and social. You know, whether we're talking about, you know, the unfortunate incident of 9/11, or um, you know, Barack Obama's speeches, or the Civil War of the 60s. Um, um, you know, it's not even social affairs and political affairs here were not a complete. I wasn't a I wasn't a complete. They were not completely foreign to me by the time I was getting here. Um, but if I were to mention anything beyond these borders to majority of my American friends, that was that it was completely foreign news.
But even
Yeah.
getting involved in politics, the way we debate
Mm-hmm.
things, you know,
Mm-hmm.
from our countries is not, it's they see us as being aggressive or stepping out of
Mm,
bounds to
mm,
vigorously debate. And debating is something that is
mm,
very much part of our societies. Again, I don't know if it's a colonial
mm,
thing or Commonwealth thing,
mm,
but we are very
mm.
big on debates, you know,
Right.
and we
Mm,
don't back down that easily. We will challenge. We don't have, there's not
mm-hmm.
a you know, and we understand the silent but passive aggression and silent
Mm-hmm.
dismissiveness of
Mm-hmm.
a shutdown of a topic, and and
Yeah.
and persons just see that, you know, I just recognize that there's this way of just folding and shutting the whole topic, where we can't
Ah.
get to the root causes, you know, debate
Mm-hmm.
stuff, you know, query and
Mm-hmm.
question. It has seemed somewhat
Mm-hmm.
offensive to be, or
Yeah.
too forward, being too forward. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
have you seen that? Like, and we do that
Yeah.
without going for each other's throats and stuff, but you know, just we sound like we want to go for
Right.
the throat, but we don't.
But it's vigorous. It first of all, the being passionate,
Passionate.
and expressing passion, whether that's in conversation or in music or in dancing. Um, um, that's something that's very being vibrant, or I would almost use that word, right?
Yeah.
So whether that the vibrancy is in music or in conversation or in art, um, or in union strike, you know, it's taking a stance and taking it passionately. I think is something that um, I would say is common, was common to me before coming here. I do find that especially within, where I work at Principia College, there's also the subculture, right, of I would say Christian Science. There's a subculture there too, that I'm yet to fully figure out. But it doesn't always invite conversation and debate and dialogue around issues and thinking together. I think there's thinking alone and working out, so to speak, your own salvation. It's not exactly a culture of fellowship. And in fellowship, there can be vigorous and passionate dialogue and debate. But when everything is individualistic, I suppose sometimes that can mean that everybody brings out their own ideas, and it's almost like a competition of ideas as opposed to putting those ideas together and potentially coming up with something that none of you would have come up with alone. And an expectation also of, so to speak, one mind, which is sometimes misinterpreted to mean, one mind, meaning my mind, whatever I brought to the conversation. And one mind sometimes to mean that there cannot be seeming disagreement. And so disagreement sometimes can be frowned upon because how can disagreement and the notion of one mind exist in the same universe, right? We should arrive at the same idea without even having to dialogue. And so there's almost a cognitive dissonance going on and an awkwardness around disagreement, perhaps, that might be related to the subculture. I think I'm still figuring it out, but that's how far I am with it. Yeah.
I totally feel you, because at the same time, the differences that we have, we talk about, or in the book that we're doing, talks about the iceberg, the things that we see up here, which is the food, which kind of road we drive on and stuff. And then you get down to the nitty gritty, and that's which you just spoke of, is that bigger piece underneath there that we somehow we think is politically correct in many places that we go, but it's not politically correct here. Have you found? I don't know if you've had this experience, but in the United States, right? Who we are and how we behave can be accepted in DC, can be accepted in California, can be accepted in New York, but maybe not where we are.
I find that to be true, yes. I have found, I feel very much at home in Chicago, for instance. And I guess there's the diversity of the place. Yes, many places in California and in DC and in New York, but yeah, I think that location we're in, is I find that difference in the extent to which I feel at home in other places compared to where we currently are.
Yeah,
culturally speaking. Yeah.
I mean, so it's so funny because, again, although this was a Caucasian Canadian that I was talking to, and I found this very interesting, that they had similar circumstances with being held up at the border, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not being
Mm-hmm.
allowed to come in.
Right.
People perceiving their country and not understanding the geography outside of that. Because
Right.
as she said, Canadians are really well traveled. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They travel
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different places. Um,
Mm.
so I'm recognizing this, if it's not a thing of color, it's a thing of experience. Because
I think so.
I have met Caucasians in DC that we can have a good old ramble with, just as I could do
Yeah.
a Frenchman or a German, and it would not be
Mm.
offensive. It is the first time
Wow.
in my life that I'm feeling
Yeah.
that I have offended so many people by just being straight up sometimes, you know. It's a different
Yeah. Too
culture.
honest.
Well, it's
Yeah.
but
Uh,
according to the last interview I just did, it's also
mhm.
about knowing this, and
Mm.
understanding where I am, I'm
Right.
not sure if that
Right.
would, because of my belief in truth and no fear for the truth, I'm not sure how to curtail this and not
Mm.
offend people though, you know,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
to first of all,
I
my own self be true.
right. Right. I don't think it's possible. Yeah, I don't think curtailing it would be a good thing. I can't imagine. Nor would it be healthy or comfortable.
Mm.
Um, you know, um, I have found it that sometimes it's just easier, since you're especially aware, especially since you're already aware that, oh, in this area that some of these some of the practices I hold dear and normal can be offensive. um Sometimes it's just easier to almost to warn people, right? Yeah, I'm gonna be blunt about this, and after enough times I think they grow into it.
And if I
uh,
might say, even like an American maybe in Saudi might have no problem in staring at a young woman, but that would be offensive. And
True.
they wouldn't see that as a problem. So I totally get it.
Right.
Sometimes
Right.
the cultural perspective. But since we have 4 minutes, I'll have a burning
Mm.
question to ask you. So,
Yeah.
given the fact that you're the international director, the fact
Right.
that we are a growing populace, what, 40% internationals now, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Intercultural relationships should be a priority, right? And
For sure.
understanding by the
Yeah.
administration, but also a
Yep.
pace of growth for students. How do you see that shift?
Yeah. Um, it is. I mean, it's definitely an area that we must approach very intentionally, and think about what we hope um, to achieve for the individual international students, but also for the institutions. How do we intend to engage students from all these cultures and to create an environment where they can engage with each other and with those who are from here, um, in ways that celebrate and honor this multiplicity of culture, um, but also in ways that um, that promote their development as individuals, right? That in order to succeed in this place, you don't need to become something other than who you are. You don't need to hate where you're coming from and see it as not of value. Um, that this is a place where you can express yourself as an individual, but also as someone from a particular culture. All the ways in which you've been prepared up to this point, you don't need to press pause or stop in order to engage and be successful here. Um, um, Now, for that to happen, truly and consistently, lots of professional development is needed on the part of faculty and staff and all employees. So that needs to be happening there a lot. We're doing a good amount of work with students when they're here in their first week of pre-orientation. Primarily at this point, it's just cultural awareness, right? So awareness of the culture that they're getting into, but also reflection on the culture that they're coming from in ways that, again, honor it, as opposed to, oh, we'll tell you, what time it is here, so that you can just organize yourself around it, because, it is what it is. We will describe the water that you're about to swim in, but the water that you've been swimming in perhaps needs to be mixed with this water. You don't need to.
Minute. We have less than 1 minute.
Oh,
and I think that you just described the process that the other interview had talked about, need for a process. Because it should definitely be a process-driven thing and intentional. Intentional.
Very much so. Very much so.
Thank you so much, because this is a good foot to end on. Thank you so much.